Okay, this is the second part to factoring polynomials and trinomials. We did this last time, so now we're going to go ahead and finish up on the second part. Go ahead and copy this down when you have a chance, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Again, the iPad is doing weird things, so whenever you get a chance, just go ahead and press pause when the screen looks good. All right, so trinomials can be written in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. For trinomials where a equals 1, what that's saying is that you don't have anything here. We assume that this number is going to be 1. There's nothing written here. Again, we're just going to assume that that number is 1 right there. It's going to look like x squared plus bx plus c. And that makes it a heck of a lot easier to factor. In this case, we're going to look for two numbers that multiply to c, and then those two numbers are going to add up to b. Okay. These numbers will be placed into parentheses x and parentheses x, and then we're going to factor out the following. Now, the best way to do this is literally to set up your x problems like what we had been practicing earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and set up an x problem. And again, normally when you guys were asking like, hey, what does this letters mean? I said, don't worry about it too much, but remember that you needed two numbers that multiplied to the top number and then added to the bottom number. And when I said like, oh, they multiply to AC and they add up to B. Now, when I multiply A times C, A is 1, C is whatever that number is. Because again, we don't have a number right there. So it's literally 1 times C, which is just, in this case, is going to be your C. All right. So let's see, what's my AC? Well, it's going to be 1 times 30. So I need two numbers that multiply to 30 and add up to the number B, which is the number in front of your middle term. In this case, is going to be 11. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to 30 and add up to 11. And so we're going to go ahead and do this systematically. So I'm going to find ways that I can multiply to 30. I'm going to go in order, right? So this is going to be 1 and what? Well, 1 and 30 multiply to 30. 2 and 15. 3 and 10. 4 doesn't work, right? 4 times something does not give me 30. 5 times 6 gives me 30. 6 times 5, but 6 times 5 is the same thing as 5 times 6, and now I'm just repeating my list again. So these are pretty much the only numbers that are going to work. It's either 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6, because those are the numbers that are going to multiply to 30. Out of those sets, I'm going to try to find a way of getting it to also add up to 11. Well, 1 and 30 can't add up to 11 no matter what's positive or negative. Same thing with 2 and 15. I can't do it with 3 and 10, but I can do it with 5 and 6. That means 5 and 6 are going to be these magic numbers that work. Let me go ahead and highlight these. 5 and 6 are going to be the numbers that are going to work. That means I'm going to write this as parentheses x, and we just said that a positive 5 and a positive 6 are the numbers that both multiply to 30 and add up to 11. So I think that this is the factored form. This thing right here is the factored form of this thing right here. Now I can always run a check by actually distributing it out, and let's just make sure that this works. X times x is x squared. X times 6 is 6x. 5 times x is 5x. And then 5 times 6 is 30. And then when I combine like terms, I get x squared plus 11x plus 30. And look at that, sure enough, that is the correct answer. So guys, my answer is right here. This is the factored form of x squared plus 11x plus 30. I figured out the two parentheses that basically gives me that answer. All right, let's go ahead and practice that again because I know the first time around is not necessarily the easiest. All right, we need to factor this. So I need to find out what parentheses what will give me that when I multiply it out. And the way we're going to do that is by setting up a diamond problem. Remember, we need to multiply to AC on the top, and we need to add to B on the bottom. AC, remember AC, A is the first term, C is the last term. So I'm going to multiply the first number times the last number. That's 1 times 24, which is just 24. And I need to add up to this number right here, which is 25. Now that I have it set up, I'm going to go ahead and start looking for these numbers. The best way to do it is to figure out, all right, what multiplies to 24? And you really should do this in order to try to save you as much time as possible. So you're going to start with the smallest number, which is 1. 1 and 24 will multiply to 24. 2 and 12 will multiply to 24. 3 and 8 multiply to 24. 4 and 6 multiply to 24. 5 doesn't work, right? 5 times something doesn't give you 24 unless you start talking about fractions, but we're not going to be dealing with those. And then the next number would be 6 times 4, but now you're just repeating your list in a backwards direction, so this is as far as we need to go. So it's got to be one of these numbers. And now that I know I have my list, now I just got to figure out, all right, well, which one of these pairs is going to also add up to 25? And right away, I see that the 1 and the 24 will match up to 25. So I think my magic numbers are going to be 1 and 24, because 1 times 24 is 24 on the top, and 1 plus 24 will give me 25 on the bottom. That means I think my answer is going to look like this: parentheses x, parentheses x. And I think that the first one's going to be a plus 1 and that the second one's going to be a plus 24. Again, we can go ahead and check this. I'm going to actually check this a little bit faster now. I'm just going to go ahead and distribute like I did on that first problem. That's going to be x times x and then x times 24. That gives me an x squared plus 24x. And when I distribute the other one, I get 1 times x and 1 times 24. That's going to be a plus x plus 24. And when I combine like terms, I get x squared plus 25x plus 24. And sure enough, that works as well. All right. Let's go ahead and do a couple of more. I'm going to skip some. Well, again, and guys, really, I picked that 1 and 24, and those are the numbers that went inside my parentheses. Okay, we're going to do this a little bit quicker. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and set up my x problem. I need two numbers that multiply to a times c. Remember, that would be 1 times 30. And I'm not going to worry about the negative just yet. I will worry about it later, though. Right now, I just need two numbers that multiply to 30. And then they also need to add up to a negative 7. Actually, let me go ahead and yeah, no, we are going to worry about that negative. Two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add up to negative 7. Let's start making my list. I'm only going to worry about the 30 over here. How do I get 30? Well, the 30 is with a 1 and 30, a 2 and 15, a 3 and 10. 4 doesn't work. 5 does work with a 6. 6 works with the 5, but that's the same thing as 5 and 6, so it's got to be those ones. All right, here's where it gets a little bit interesting because I need two numbers that add up to negative 7. And right now I have 1 and 30. Doesn't work. 2 and 15 doesn't work. 3 and 10 will work as long as the 10 is negative. So this is the set that's going to work. If I do 3 plus negative 10, that will give me a negative 7. And if I go 3 times negative 10, that's also going to give me a negative 30. So these are, in fact, the numbers. I absolutely need that negative for this to work. So again, my answer is going to look like x parentheses something. And I'm saying it's a positive 3 with a negative 10. As a check, I'm going to go ahead and distribute these things. I'm going to go ahead and do it without the arrows because at this point you should be pretty good with it. X times x is x squared. X times negative 10 is negative 10x. 3 times x is a positive 3x. And then 3 times negative 10 gives me a negative 30. I'm going to combine these two in the middle. I get x squared minus 7x minus 30. And sure enough, that works as well. So it looks like we did do this correctly. I should be putting check marks here because these are my checks and they are working out. All right, and then for the last one here, we're going to go ahead and set up my x. Remember, I need to multiply to AC. I need to add up to B. AC, my A is 1. My C is 42. So 1 times 42, that's going to give me 42. And then I need to add up to a negative 17. This is why that list is so important, guys, because it's kind of hard to figure out all these combinations without like really going through each number. So let's see, 1 times 42 will work. Let me make this a little bit more to the side because I think I'm going to need some space over here. 1 and 42 multiplies to 42. 2 and 21. 3 does work. 3 and I believe it's 14. 14, 28. Yep, 14. 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, 6 and 7 works. 7 and 6 works, but that's a repeat, so it's got to be one of these combinations. I'm trying to multiply to a positive 42 and add up to a negative 17. Which one of these will add up to 17? Well, 1 and 42, I can't do any combination there. 2 plus 21 is 23. If I subtract them, that's like 19. That's not going to work. 3 and 14 will add up to 17, but I don't want a 17. I want a negative 17. So I can work with the 3 and the 14 as long as this is negative and this is negative. Then negative 3 plus negative 14 will give me a negative 17. And then negative 3 times negative 14 will give me a positive 42. So that's the combination I'm going to work with right here. It's going to be a negative 3 and a negative 14. These are the numbers that I say are going to work. So that would be a parentheses x minus 3 and a parentheses x minus 14. And again, you can go ahead and run your check, but just trust me, when you do run your check, it is going to work. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and just move on. Combining both methods. Remember what we said yesterday is that you always have to look out for the GCF first if possible. So when you're factoring these guys, factor out the GCF first, then you can go ahead and start doing your X method. So from yesterday, what did we learn? Well, I'm going to try to find what goes into all of these. It looks like the GCF here is 3. So I'm going to write GCF is 3. If I factor out that 3, that's going to be 3 parentheses x squared plus 2x. And I think that's a minus 24. Okay, so I factored it once, but now if you notice this problem right here on the inside of the parentheses looks like the problems we were doing above, which means I can factor it again. In this case, my A is 1, my B is 2, and my C is negative 24. We're using our new A, B's, and C's. So I'm going to start setting up my X's. And let's see, I'm going to go A times C on the top. So that's a 1 times negative 24, which is a negative 24. And then my B down here, which is a positive 2. All right, let's make my list. How do I get to a negative 24? Well, let's see, that's going to be a 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. 5 doesn't work, 6 and 4, but that's a repeat. All right, and which one of these combinations will also add up to 2? Well, 1 and 24 doesn't work, 2 and 12 doesn't work, 3 and 8, ooh, gets close, but no. 4 and 6 will work as long as I have a negative 4 and a positive 6. When I add those up, that will give me a positive 2. And when I multiply negative 4 times 6, that also gives me the negative 24. So that's exactly the combination I'm looking for, the negative 4 and the positive 6. So remember, when I factor this part out here, then it's going to factor to parentheses x, and I'm going to put a minus 4 and a plus 6. That takes care of this part right here, right? But don't forget to bring back your 3. We kind of ignored the 3 for a little bit. It's still in the front. I need to bring it back. And this is going to be my final answer. And again, you can run a check, distribute everything, and then see how that works, okay? All right, let's try the next one. I'm going to find the GCF first. Let's see, this has a 6, that has a 42, that has a 60. As far as the numbers are concerned, I think I can pull out a 6. This has an x cubed, this has an x squared, and that has an x. As far as the x's are concerned, I can pull out an x. All right, how do I get that 6x cubed back? Well, I'd have to multiply that 6x times an x squared in order to get it back. 6x times what is going to give me a negative 42x squared? Well, I need to go 6 times negative 7, and I need another x. And then 6x times what will give me a 60x? Well, it's just a positive 10. All right, so that's the first part is I factored out the GCF. I have a 6x on the outside, and then an x squared minus 7x plus 10, right? I got to be careful with this. I really shouldn't have written it like this. I know that the GCF is 6x, and so when I factored it, I should be rating it as 6x like that. Okay, Now that I have that, let's go ahead and start doing my x method. As far as my x method is concerned, remember I need to get two numbers that multiply to AC. 1 times 10 is 10. And then I need two numbers that add up to B, which in this case is going to be the -7. All right, let's find all the ways that I can multiply to 10. To multiply to 10, that's going to be 1 and 10. Next one will be 2 and 5. 3 doesn't work, 4 doesn't work, 5 and 2 multiplies to 10, but that's the same thing as 2 and 5. So it's got to be one of those two. It looks like the only way I can get these numbers to add up to a -7 is if I use this one. But if I want a -7, I need both of those numbers to be negative. So I'm going to need a -2 and I'm going to need a -5. All right, so let me go ahead and factor this part out. I know to factor this part out, I need these two numbers, the -2 and the -5. So I'm going to write parentheses x minus 2, parentheses x minus 5. And don't forget that you need to bring down this 6x right here. It does not go away. So I'm going to bring that down, bring it to the front. Kind of ignored it for a second, but you got to bring it back. So my final answer is 6x times parentheses x minus 2, x times parentheses x minus 5. All right, we got two more problems. Same thing. First, you're going to factor out the GCF. Guys, I can't tell you how important that is. So many times, students will say, I don't know what I did wrong. It's because you didn't factor out the GCF. And remember, when you're factoring out the GCF, if there's a negative leading term, let me go ahead and put a little thought bubble. Negative leading term, we need to factor that out as well. So what am I going to factor out? I'm going to factor out a negative. As far as the numbers are concerned, this has a 2, that has a 22, that has 120. For sure, I can factor out a 2. I'm going to factor out a -2. And as far as x's are concerned, this has 2 of them. This has 1. This doesn't have any, so I can't take out any of those x's. All right, so I'm going to factor out a -2. When I factor out the -2, how do I get this back? Well, it already has a -2 on that first one. I just need an x squared. -2 times what is going to give me a positive 22x? You would need a -11 because -2 times -11 is a positive 22, and you need an x. And then -2 times what is going to give me positive 120? You would need a -60 for that. So I factored out the GCF, and now I'm just going to go ahead and ignore the -2 for now, and I'm only going to work with this guy. I'll bring the -2 back later, okay? But I'm going to factor the pink region. Remember, to factor a trinomial like this, you're going to start with your x method. You're going to multiply a times c on the top. So 1 times -60 gives me -60. And you need it to add to your b, which in this case is -11. All right, let's figure out all the ways that I can multiply to -60. So I'm going to start making my list. 1 and 60 works. 2 and 30 works. 3 and 20 works. 4 and 15 works. 5 and 12 works. 6 and 10 works. 7 does not work. 8 does not work. 9 does not work. 10 does work with 6, but that's the same thing. So it looks like 60 has a nice long list. All right, out of those combinations, how can I get two of those numbers to add up to a -11? Well, for sure, not the first one, not the second one, not the third one, but it looks like this one would work as long as the 15 is negative. 4 plus -15 is -11, and then 4 times -15 is -60. So this is the combination that's going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and write parentheses x, and the numbers I'm going to be using is a +4 and a -15. And now that I have that factored out, remember, we still need to bring back that -2 in the front. Don't lose that -2 in the front. It is so important, and that is my final answer. This whole thing up on the top is the exact same thing as this, but this bottom portion, we call it in factored form. We have completely factored it. If I were to distribute all of it and then distribute the -2 at the very end, you would end up with exactly this. All right, let's take a look at the last one. I'm going to go kind of quickly because that bell's going to ring. GCF. If I try to take a look, the GCF would be b to the fifth. So if I try to get that b to the fifth back, b to the fifth, how do I get this back? That would be a b squared plus a 29b plus a 28. All right, let's go ahead and use my x method. I'm going to go 1 times 28. That gives me 28 on the top. And it needs to add up to a positive 29. I'm going to make my list 1 and 28, 2 and 14. 3 doesn't work, 4 and 7. 5 doesn't work, 6 doesn't work, 7 does work with 7 and 4, but that's the same. All right, now that I have that, it looks like this first one's going to work with a 1 and a 28. So this pink portion right here factors to 1 and 28. So I'm going to go parentheses b plus 1, parentheses b plus 28. And remember that I had that b to the fifth in the front. We're going to bring down that b to the fifth, and we are done. All right. Hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask.